some more advanced equipment stuff first before we move on to some mental things and whatever else anybody else wants to talk about. One of my favorite projects that I had worked on was the AAE gold plunger itself. So I initially just set out to work with them on designing one because they had one, but it wasn't very popular and I wanted to figure out why. So at first I wanted to stop something that happens all the time on X10 arrows with a plunger stem. That's a biter one. Does anybody here have, and I should have asked during the break or before the break, carbon arrows or aluminum arrows that they've shot off of a biter plunger handy at all? No? I don't think he has a biter plunger. Yeah.
Well, X10s.
Yeah, X10s off a biter would be fine.
Yeah, they're not bad.
If you don't mind, I'll go back over this stuff when you come back in.
Run!
So, while he's getting them, okay, so, how long have you shot your same biter plunger stem?
I try and change them every year.
Have they ever worn?
A tiny bit, but not.
Okay, so there's two things that are rubbing together. If two things are rubbing together, friction, they have to wear down, right? Yeah. And if one, generally, this biter stem, I don't know how many years old this is, but I've never really seen a biter stem wear a whole lot outside of like a dusty environment because there's sand involved. Because it's a carbon impregnated in a plastic, basically. And so you got two surfaces rubbing together, one's gonna wear. This stem, I don't know the price of it, but I imagine it's probably in the $12 to $20 price range. You have a set of arrows that are, I don't know, they're probably $4.19 a dozen now at minimum for Easton arrows. So what's wearing if two things are rubbing together? Your arrows. And I'll prove to you with these arrows, and I don't care how old or new they are, within a week of shooting a X10 off of my biter plunger, the X10 has a flat spot worn into the side of it. And it's changing your tune as you're doing that. And also aluminum arrows, if anybody's ever shot an aluminum arrow off a biter stem, you can see the silver through the arrow because it's been wearing the finish off. So I basically just said, if you have two things that are rubbing together and your biter stem doesn't wear down as you're shooting, then your arrows are going to be wearing. Instead of a $20 plunger stem being worn down, you're wearing down a $80 arrow. So everybody can, and we'll pass around a couple arrows, but right about here, maybe, 4 or 5 inches past the point, if you hold the arrow like this and spin the arrow in your hand, you'll feel a giant flat spot worn into the side of the arrow. You're welcome.
You sell X10s while you got
So, as it goes along, if you can't find it, so you want to hold your fingers on the arrow and then spin the arrow. And then move your hand up and down. Yeah. No, so hold yours here.
Yeah.
It's about 5 inches.
So if you can't find it, maybe your neighbor can help you find it. So again, two things are rubbing together. One thing's going to wear. Your arrows are wearing, not your $20 plunger stem. That's not a genius idea in my opinion. I mean, it's great for shop owners, but and the same thing with aluminum arrows. If anybody had aluminum arrows, you would see that the finish of an aluminum arrow wears away. Within a half a dozen shots, you can start to see a line forming on an aluminum arrow because the biter stem is so hard, which is great because it doesn't change your center shot or anything like that. But for me, in my experience, an aluminum arrow, if I shot the same 3 arrows and had a tune, whatever my tune was, and I shot the same 3 arrows, 3 arrow ends, and after 2 days of shooting those 3 arrows, they were junk. They did not shoot the same. They did not score the same, they did not tune the same because the spine changed so much. I had to retune my arrows weekly with aluminum arrows when I shot biter plunger stems, and I would turn the knock so I had lines all over the arrow. And so I set out to design a plunger stem with AAE to not do that. And the first iteration that we came up with was this solid steel stem with a brass tip on the end, because brass is relatively soft. However, it weighed about 80 grains, a lot, weighed a lot. And it just wasn't forgiving. Couldn't figure out why I wasn't shooting well with it. My groups just happened to open up, and it definitely wasn't forgiving. And so we started developing and designing different ones, and then we went to a titanium stem, and then eventually went to a carbon stem with a hard anodized aluminum tip, and then an aluminum insert on the back for the spring to rest against. So the biter stem weighs about 12 grains, and this carbon stem of the AAE stem weighs about 8 grains. And I found that as you cut down the weight of the plunger stem itself, it just, for whatever reason, maybe due to inertia or resistance to movement because of the weight of it, allowed the spring to absorb the inconsistencies of my finger release. And ultimately, my forgiveness definitely went up, but more importantly, I never had to retune my aluminum arrows and never had to retune my X10 arrows, and I could shoot the same X10 for years and never have a groove in the arrow like that, never. Whereas I have a set of arrows that I shot at World Championships and only at World Championships. So a 72 arrow ranking round, the practice during the event, and a couple of team round matches and a couple individual matches, and I had grooves worn in my arrows from just one single weekend. So you'll see as it goes around, I'll pass these around too, this carbon stem, it has the black tip. That black tip is what pushes against the arrow. That's hard anodized. And you'll see that it's worn away and it started to turn silver. This stem is over 12 months old, and it did not wear a groove in it, so it didn't change my center shot at all. But I can't suggest going with the AE Gold Plunger enough, simply because this stem, I think, is $24.99 retail, and it's a whole lot cheaper than a set of arrows, even aluminum arrows.
Can we buy just the stem?
I was going to
You
say,
can.
does the stem fit in a biter button?
It does,
Sold.
but I played with the internals of the AAE and the way that they bore the center out. It ends up being much smoother because they have there's a lining in there, and so the stem itself, the movement is smoother, and even in a dirty environment, I never had any sticky hang-ups like that can happen on stems, why people replace them. So
I think it's Teflon, isn't it? It's got Teflon.
I think it's Teflon or something like that, yeah. So, food for thought on that one. Next thing is Knox. Can you pass me a couple of those Easton pin knocks that are in that cabinet there? Just grab me a handful of the bags if you wouldn't mind.
Is this why you always shoot that?
No, leave them close.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so for Knox, just about everybody shoots the Easton pin knocks. Some people shoot the biters if they choose to shoot them. We'll talk about both. But on this pit part number right here, down here, right above the barcode, it's a 4-digit code. They're different for different colors, I assume, and different sizes. But there is a 4-digit code and then a dash, and then 2 numbers after that, either 01, 02, 03, or 04. Anybody know what those numbers mean?
Batch number.
Hmm?
Batch number.
Good guess,
Mold
but no.
number.
Hmm?
Mold number.
Good guess, very close.
It's the actual size of the knock.
It is the cavity that the knock came out of. So there's 4 cavities in each mold that these Easton knocks come out of, and they are numbered 1, 2, 3, or 4. Every single knock, it comes off the parts tree. Anybody build models ever, and you get a parts tree? So the knocks come out of the mold in a parts tree, and then somebody hand cuts number 1 into bin number 1, number 2 into bin number 2, and they fill up a 55-gallon drum full of knocks, and then they send the knocks to Easton, literally. AAE makes these, by the way. And what they do And what happens is cavities do not hit the same. If you take a knock from cavity 1, cavity 2, cavity 3, and cavity 4 and shoot them out of a hooter shooter in a compound, so a shooting machine, they impact different at 20 yards. Literally, like this far apart at 20 yards. So you have to pay attention which knocks you have. This is bag number 2, or cavity number 2. If you order and put on cavity number 3, guess what's gonna happen? And then what if you have a dozen of these and then you break a knock and you put one of these on one arrow, you're welcome again. What's gonna happen? They're gonna impact different.
As a distributor, though, we cannot buy them per cavity.
No, you can't.
No.
No. But you know, your shooters can be like, oh, cavity 3, I want that one. When I go to Lancaster at the trailer, I go, I need cavity number 3, small groove, and they're like, oh, here we go, because they know. The pro shooters know. But anyway, cavity 1 and cavity, I think it's cavity 1 and cavity 3 are very similar. Cavity 2 and cavity 4 are very similar. So what happens is every knock itself, the design of the mold is the same. Okay. The actual internal and external structure of the knock of each cavity is the same, but because of the way the structure itself cools at different amounts in different parts of the cavity, or the mold, therefore each cavity, each knock slightly distorts in a very specific manner, and it's extremely consistent from cavity to cavity. So that's why cavity 1 always will hit the same on cavity 1, no matter when you bought them and which batch they came out of. So you have to pay attention to that. However, there's another company, Gold Tip makes Knox. I shoot the Gold Tip Knox. I actually bought the Gold Tip Knox because I liked them so much. And instead of having the cavity numbers printed on their bags like this, each knock has a different amount of dots on the side of the knock. There's anywhere from 1 to 8 dots on the knock. I'll pass them around, you can see. And each dot and the amount of dots represents which cavity it came from. So there's 8 different cavities in the mold that made these knocks. However, they knew about this, the distortion, and they actually modified and changed every single cavity to change and cool when it came out of the mold. So that way each knock hits the same hole out of a shooting machine regardless of the cavity, and none of the packages are marked with which cavity came out of it, because in a dozen knocks or a pack of 100, there's all of them from 1 to 8 cavities. So
when the Eastern knock has come out the bag, there is no way you can tell which cavity.
nope. Whereas the Gold Tip, you can. So here's a handful of Gold Tips if you want to look for the dots. Not really important. It's just neat to see. They're very, very tiny. They are opposite the GT logo, the Gold Tip logo. Now the word on the street, don't know if it's true, but I forever have been told that biter knocks come out of, they only have one cavity and they come out of the same cavity. I mean, if that's true, that's great. However, I know for a fact that cavities wear over time and have to be repaired and replaced, because there's dozens, if not hundreds of tons of pressure that molten plastic is being shoved into that mold. And if it's all coming out of one, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of injections into that single cavity, and it's wearing over time. So when you buy a bag A in whenever, and bag B a year later, how do you know that it hasn't worn and changed the impact point? I haven't tested that, but to me that just seems to make sense from my standpoint. I was never sponsored by Gold Tip. I'm just sharing this information with you guys so you can understand it. So, but I'm going to take it to the next level. So, with these new pin knocks, what was your general customer feedback when people started playing with these new ones?
Most people took to the change, yeah?
Yeah, because most people clicked it on their string and it went click, like really loud and definitive and nice, and it's like, ooh, that feels nice, I like it. I felt the same thing. My groups got worse, and it frustrated me and I couldn't figure out why. I talked to some people, and it comes down to this. So if you have your basic shape of a knock, drawing is terrible, but you have a basic shape of a knock where there's a recess, or there's the ears are thicker here than they are where the string sits, yeah? So that's why you have the click. The New Easton Pin Knox, these ears are much fatter, like this. So what does that mean? If you take large groove knocks, so large groove knocks are 98 thousandths of an inch inside diameter of this here. And if you use the recommended string size that people do, or center serving size, so for a large groove knock, they recommend about 110 thousandths of an inch center serving diameter on the outside for proper knock fit. Okay, so that means it snaps on there good, it can slide up and down relatively easy, but there's no movement of the rocking back and forth. It's not too loose. So they recommend this. If you had a string with 110,000 center serving outside diameter and use large groove knocks, the old Easton pin knocks, non-G pins, the regular ones, decoupled with anywhere from, if I remember correctly, 1.8 or 1.7 to 1.8 pounds. So that means if you hooked a bow scale up to a knock and you were to pull it off the string, it comes off with about 1.8 pounds of force, okay? The New Easton pin knock decouples with 2.2 to 2.5 pounds of force. And the gold tip pin knock, again, it's large groove, same thing. It decouples with 1.9 to 1.1 pounds of force. So what does that mean, and why did my groups open up? So, as the arrow is being delivered and the bow is coming down to brace height, once it hits this point, now the string is going to start decelerating as it continues to move forward, yeah? It's not going to just hit brace height and instantly stop. Due to inertia, it's going to want to keep going forward, and it does actually move forward quite a lot. So the arrow is going to continue to want to maintain speed, so as the string is starting to decelerate, the knock decouples and then the arrow is gone. Okay, everybody following so far? So what does that do if you have a lot more pressure to discouple the knock compared to one that decouples less, with less force? That means that the knock is decoupling further past brace height than one that takes less force to decouple, right? So once the string hits this point and it starts to decelerate, it's going to want to start changing direction and come back this way. So you start getting rotational movement, and that's where this type of stuff comes in from. The limbs moving and they're watching the knock track. Everybody's seen these videos from the Win and Win stuff? So I directly, theoretically say that if you have a knock that's coming off the string with more force than another one, then it has more chance to be influenced by this type of motion and disturbed as it's going down and your groups open up. And the people that suggested me to use gold tip pin knocks said absolutely, we believe that's why it's happening. And Easton knew about the cavity issue, they didn't fix it. They knew about the clicking, the hardness to take off the string issue, and they didn't fix it for whatever reason. I do not know, but there's some more info for you guys to think about. So
Did your groups instantly improve when going to the gold tip
yes,
knocks?
yes. And actually, not only that, this one won't actually sell you stuff, unfortunately, or sell more stuff for you. But if you also look at those gold tip pin knocks, the vertical height of them, so the vertical profile, if you were to look at the knock from this way, up and down, is actually smaller than the shaft itself. So, you know, I'd go through, I don't know, in a month, 3 dozen knocks or so, breaking them at 70 meters with the regular ones, right? Gold tip knocks, maybe 2 a month, because it is so much smaller than an Easton one that I think that the bulge of the point would hit somewhere on the shaft and push it out of the way before the point hit the knock. I don't know, just from it being smaller, I broke a million less knocks. So that was also a benefit as well. Yeah.
Joe, what's your thoughts on pin overs and in outs?
Specific to, my thoughts on that specific to X10s.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I believe due to the X10 design and it being weaker in the back half, that the biter knock will make it even weaker in the back, and it's proven. You can go bare shaft tune and put the biter out knock versus the biter pin knock, and you're going to get a weaker tune with the biter out knock. Because it's plastic and it's, you know, just weaker than the shaft, right? And it also makes the arrow a little bit longer. But I have a really hard time putting a piece of plastic or Teflon between my knock and my arrow shaft, because what if, I don't know if anybody else here, but I could never get them to fit on the arrow. They just want to fall off. So everybody says, oh, you put some Teflon tape down or a piece of plastic and then you push the knock on and it keeps it on. Well, what if you have more plastic built up on one side than the other? The knock's misaligned.
Yeah.
That's not good. I'd rather have something straight. So I personally like the pin knocks better. Pin outs, yeah, it protects the shaft maybe a little bit, I don't know. If anything, it just adds more weight, stiffens the arrow up, makes it less forgiving in my opinion. I shot the biter out knocks for a long time, I liked them. But then, you know, I started playing with this stuff, and the biter out knocks are massive, or the biter knocks are quite tall compared to these gold tip knocks. So, you know, my thoughts are, like I said, I have a hard time doing the out knocks. Arguably, they're really good because the Koreans crush with them. But I can't verify the straightness of them very easily because there's not a central location that I can put a dial indicator on when I'm spine checking and selecting my arrows and stuff. So I can't tell how good or not that knock is misaligned. You know, you can look at it, but because the knock's asymmetrical, it's hard to see. Plus that angle forward, for me, in my opinion, again, I told you about, well, first, if you're looking at a knock and this is the side profile of it, a regular knock has this type of, actually, we'll just pretend it's this. A regular knock has, yeah, that was right, this type of shape where the string sits in this way. So this is not, the ears are this way, like this. And so the string sits against it that way, right? The biter knock has this angle to it, like that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the arrow from the side, a regular knock has a flat surface against it, whereas a biter knock has an asymmetrical surface. And the whole idea to that was so the arrow can be pushed flatly straight from old school technique, which I don't know where you are, talked about more bottom finger instead of top finger and having, yeah, right there. More bottom finger, what does my string angle do where my knock would go? String is angled forward, so yeah, an asymmetrical knock makes sense. Most people now are using more index finger equal amounts, and so now you can see the string is flat at full draw. So all this does is make you need a much higher knocking point to keep the same bare shaft tune. And for whatever reason, I always needed a slightly higher knocking point than most people, so when I went to biter knocking points, I was super high up and I didn't like the look of it, so I went with a regular pin knock to fix that issue. So that's my thoughts on the biter stuff. Okay, next thing to talk about. Yeah,
one more thing.
Sure.
We can keep changing the knocks and get a brand new knock, and every knock's perfect.
Mhm.
What about wear on the knocking point of the string, please?
Yeah, it's a wear point. You got to make sure that you're consistent and it's not breaking down. So
How long would your knocking point on your string last?
the season at minimum.
A long time, yeah.
Chances are, honestly, a new bow would show up and I'd have to rebuild the string anyway.
When you're saying the string lasts, they often last plenty of time.
Yes.
Thanks.
With good, you know, with a properly built string that's under stress as they serve it, so that way when it relaxes under stress, it squeezes the serving. Yeah, exactly. I would never build my own string ever again. I would always buy them professionally, for sure. No doubt, 100%.
Super server.
Yes. So, but before every major tournament, I would replace all my knocks on my arrows with new arrows, or new knocks, because as they wear and as they stretch, again, you shoot a dozen arrows, you break one knock here or there, how do you know which one's broken, which one's not? The old ones are stretching, they're not going to decouple the same, impact point could be changing. All the top pro shooters, especially compound shooters, change their knocks before every major tournament. And then they just keep a bag of used knocks for their practice arrows. So. Next thing is finger tabs. So everybody, I would assume most people are shooting cordovan leather tab faces. I know for a fact that the AAE ones are absolutely the way they're supposed to be. I'm going to show you something interesting in these. So cordovan leather is horse leather. It has a very distinct grain to it. And the way that you find it is if you take your tab and you bend it like this, which is not pleasant because you could be, changing the way your tab is shaped. But you bend it this way and then you take your finger and you rub it one direction versus the other, and you can feel one direction's rough, one direction's super slick. You can turn it sideways and it feels the same. But anyway, so each cordovan thing comes in a football shape. It's like about this, or a rugby ball for you guys. A shape. Okay? And you have to cut all of them the same because the grain grows this way on every single football, or whatever you want to call it. So if you're right-handed, each one has to be cut out like this, so that causes a ton of waste. Whereas most other tab manufacturers orient their tabs like this to get the maximum yield of tab faces from the actual shape of leather. And what that's doing is going to be changing your tune because it's going to change your release speed, and it will obviously directly relate to how long these last. If you're going with the grain, it's just going to keep smoothing the grain out, but if you're going against the grain, it's going to be pulling it up, and eventually it'll start delaminating. So AAE was first making them all over the place. I was like, you can't do this. This is not the way that it's supposed to be. You've got to do it where it's oriented correctly, and they said, oh well, we're going to have to bite the bullet and charge more for them, and that's why it's expensive. But I don't know about any of the other tab manufacturers, what they're doing, but that's an easy way to quick check the leather. So you do have to bend it completely over backwards, and the more you pinch it off, you can really feel the direction. And this is a used face, and you can really feel the difference in that.
Do you have any figures behind that? So like foot per second effects, or?
Honestly, no. I did try it. Well, so what raised my concern was my impact point was changing so much at 70 meters when I went from my main tab to my backup tab, even though they looked the same break-in wise. And I ended up finding out the grain wasn't oriented correctly. I never bothered to do the foot per second stuff, but I would guess that the tune would change because of that, and then you'd have to compensate with bow weight. So it's hard to compare apples to apples.
Have you ever tried the synthetic material? I think it's called Volcano or kangaroo leather. Have you ever tried anything like that?
I've tried the kangaroo leather. I liked it. Yeah, I had no issue with it. But I just played with it on somebody's tab and shot it a handful of times. I never really got some of it to play with. They told me that it was naturally waterproof, so if that's true, that's a big advantage. So that'll basically cover most of the tuning stuff. The mental stuff that I wanted to talk about, unless anybody has any questions about tuning stuff before I go forward real quick.
Only one thing, how do you decide what length of long rod and twins?
Generally, you can't go wrong with a 30-inch long rod, and in my opinion, you can't go wrong with the 15-inch side rods. And then you can adjust the weights up or down on the side rods to compensate for whatever length you basically want it to feel like for this aiming pattern reason. So I tend to say go with if you're going to buy one set, buy the 15s, because you can always go with less weight to make it feel like a shorter rod, whereas if you had a 10-inch rod, you can only add so much weight on it before it becomes just super heavy. That makes sense.
Just ask about that that measurement of a large groove. You want it to be 0.110 on the outside diameter.
Yeah.
What does that equate to, like an 8125 number of strand strings and the size of a serving that you might?
Generally, I'd say you're going to shoot a 20 strand string, and that
I should do that.
Yeah, so you should shoot a 20 strand string, and you should use whatever center serving size makes that size.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
What's that?
That's how we make.
String being lost. Yeah.
No, you could.
I'm gonna guess it's a 17,000 halo.
Yeah. I'd probably go either or.
I'd also use
14014.
I'd also use 450 plus. I don't remember. It's the original Fast Flight that BCY makes. I'd use that string material, not 8125.
Why is that?
652.
It's magic. It's why every Korean bow sounds like a Korean bow. If you've ever shot anywhere near the Koreans, you'll tell their bows are distinctly different than every other bow out there. It's just because their string material is different. They use the original Fast Flight. I think it's 450 plus. You'll have to look at the BCY catalog. It might be 650.
652.
No, it's not 652. Maybe. It's definitely not 652X. That stuff's
Definitely
compound
not.
stuff. Yeah. It's whatever original Fast Flight is. And Brownell Fast Flight is not Fast Flight. It's changed. The formula is different. It's not actually Fast Flight. Just saying that. So the mental stuff is, it's difficult to talk about just because it's so different for everybody and everybody's process is different. I talked about different thought processes while you're at full draw, whether it's a thought or a word or a feeling or a word. I do find that it's extremely important to occupy your conscious mind while you're executing the shot and doing it in a very consistent manner. So Lanny and Troy Bassam that talk about that stuff with mental management, I do like that part of it. And so I do think that it is critical to occupy your conscious mind the same way with the same thought, the same feeling. Mine is hitting that C spot. Some people like to say, whatever, I've tried all those words that didn't work. I like the feeling of the finish better. Or you could maybe mentally picture your finish spot better to push yourself towards. That's really important. And I think that's very, very critical. However, the stuff that I tell you here, like the reason that I know what I know about the Knox and what I know about the tabs and the plunger stems and the extensions and you name it, is because I wanted to leave no stone unturned, no option unexplored, because I found it to be massive advantages in speed and wind drift and ultimately in mental confidence that I had a leg up on the competition. I put in the time, I put in the effort, I did the research. I brought together a training plan on my own. I didn't wait for somebody to deliver it to me. I made sure that it was made specific to my exact needs, my exact capabilities. And I committed to it fully because I believed in it truly, because I helped create it. I didn't leave it up to somebody else. And, I think that pays off so much more than any other mental health book or anything ever will. And it's not just from a tuning standpoint, it's from a training standpoint. Like I said, the physical training and then developing a periodization training plan that if anybody's got Heather and I's book about the training for archery book that we wrote, there is a scientific method that every sport in the world uses except for archery for some unknown reason to ramp up and down volume and intensity of your training loads in order to predict a peak at a chosen moment that you choose. So you can choose when to peak and you can predict it. So again, leaving no stone unturned, no option unexplored, and literally leaving nothing else out there. So that way when the tournament was over with and the Olympic Games was over, that I knew that I left it all out on the field. There was no option but the maximum potential to happen at a given time. So it's it might seem like a cop-out to really kind of summarize mental stuff like that, but in my opinion, it's really what it boils down to. You do have to occupy your conscious brain because, whether it be at Blank Bell, upstairs here, or in front of millions of people on TV while you're shooting in Lord's cricket ground, it's the same thing. It's still you, the target, the arrow, and your opponent, and you just got to put your arrow closer to the center than your opponent. So, like I said, mentally you can't leave any other option out there for other than maximum potential. So, like I said, that's the reason that I have this process and know this stuff and nobody else does. So, or compound shooters do, because that's a cutthroat division. So, although I couldn't shoot very much, that was also part of it. Koreans have a interesting thing that they can fall back on. if they make an Olympic team, they get the average minimum wage for the country for the rest of their life. Hands down, no questions asked. Doesn't matter if you're a drug addict after then, doesn't matter if you're a lowlife, doesn't matter if you're still another Olympic medalist the next game's around. You get the average minimum wage for the rest of your life. So it doesn't matter how destroyed your shoulders are, how much pain you're in, what doesn't matter. You get, you know, whatever the average minimum wage is for the country. That's what you get in a dividend for the rest of your life. So they have that, we didn't. I'm sure you guys don't have that either. So, you know, you get a thanks, and if it's not at least in the States, if it's not a gold medal, they don't care. We have hundreds, you know, we have 130 some odd gold medals almost every summer games, and if you're not one of them, and you're not taking home a dozen of them like Michael Phelps, then sponsors don't care, and you don't get money. There's no money in the sport, so I couldn't shoot 1,000 arrows every day like some of the Koreans do, you know, because my shoulders hurt, and there was definitely a point of negative returns, so I had to find that advantage elsewhere, and this is the type of stuff that I found it in. Any questions about mental stuff? I know somebody asked about target panic, and I kind of covered a little bit of that.
You did.
Yeah,
Jake, can I ask you about bad shots?
sure.
So Tiger Woods said that after a bad shot, he would allow himself 10 paces where he would curse and beat himself up, and then pace 11, shut it out, didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a process for a bad shot to reset mentally?
So my opinion on that is studies have shown that if you hit your thumb with a hammer, that curse words actually do reduce the amount of pain that you do actually experience. So in my opinion, it is absolutely okay to acknowledge that you had a bad shot, but what you do with that acknowledgement is the most important part. So you do have to reframe it in a positive way. I do believe that fully. So instead of saying, I collapsed on that shot, I can't believe I collapsed, it should be, I really need to make sure I maintain back tension through release into follow through, and make sure I hit C spot with full commitment to the back tension. So if you reframe it in a positive way, to make sure that you're talking to your subconscious and reinforcing what you want yourself to do instead of reinforcing the bad shot that you shot, you can still be pissed at yourself that you made a mistake, but you have to reframe it in a positive way to summarize the way to fix it, for sure. So.
Having competed closely with and shot with the Koreans, in your opinion, why do you think they're so far ahead of everyone else?
So their national sport is archery. If they literally, how they weed through shooters is, you're left-handed, you don't shoot a bow. They go down the line. You're struggling with target panic, you don't shoot anymore. You're the best in your high school, we don't care about your grades anymore, keep shooting well. You're in college now, we don't care about your grades, you keep shooting, we'll pass you. It's like in the States, if you play American football and you're good, they don't care if you're a drunk and you steal the teacher's car and flip it over. They won't expel you for being a terrible human being as long as you're winning that football game, right? So it's the same way in Korea. They literally just breed people into archery and push them forward, and if you falter in any way, there's 1,000 other to take your place. That's the biggest reason that they have so much success and so much depth. You go to their national competition, it's still shot at, it's still a FIDA, and it's like hundreds of male shooters shoot over 1,300 feet around every year. Hundreds. Like, we went there and shot a business tournament, and I think I shot like a 1304 and ranked like, I ranked like 56th or something there. It was stupid. You know, they have, you know, yeah. We had, at that time, I think Brady was the only one in the States to shoot over 1350, and they had hundreds of people shoot over 1350 at that time. And that's part of the reason why, this is the plug for Win and Win, or any Korean-made equipment, why their equipment is so much better than every other made equipment. Because there's X1320 shooters building bows, whereas there's people at Hoyt that have never shot a bow in their life building bows. So who's gonna know what to look out for and who's gonna care more? Just in laying up the limbs, just in, you know, the clamping of the machinery and stuff. Like, there's a lot to say about quality control and what people know what to look for, because some have experience and some don't. And that's my best advice that I could ever say about equipment. But
Sorry, Ash.
why Koreans are ridiculous.
Les, can I have a refund?
Not to say that Hoyt doesn't have a good bow. They do. In my opinion, their engineering is far superior, because they for sure do flex force modeling, and the reasons that the cutouts are in each bow are there for a very specific reason, because of the way the riser is flexing. Whereas I asked the people in Win, I was like, how do you design risers? They're like, oh, we make a bow, we send it to the top shooter in Korea, we make a change, we send it to him, he says if it's better or worse, and we keep going. That's not engineering. That's at least what they claimed. I'm sure it's a bit more scientific than that, just based on the data that they produce. But yeah, that's my opinion. But yeah, that's the only reason that Korea is so good. Again, the depth and what they have at the end. Plus, as they're shooting, like, makes 6 figures a year shooting for Hyundai Steel. Before he shoots a single arrow, he makes over $100,000. And that doesn't even take into consideration the bonuses they give him for winning, the individual sponsorships he brings in from many of the other companies. And that's why Hoyt's like, you know, when I was trying to negotiate, and even every bow company, especially when it win, I was like, hey, it's different in the States. I can't just shoot your bow because the States doesn't pay me money. I can't afford to do this unless you pay me. And they're like, but we don't pay anybody. And I genuinely believe them that they didn't pay anybody up front to shoot their stuff, because Korea pays them 6 figures. Or, you know, you're Michele Frangili and you make 60, 70 grand a year from the Italian Federation before you go shoot a single arrow. That's a lot of money. That can float a house and car payment and life, you know, and that relieves a lot of stress, and therefore you actually end up getting more performance out of it, because, you know, when I went to China, I guarantee I lost $1,000 going to that tournament, and I had to, if I placed third, I could profit $500. It's not a smart way to do business, you know. So, any other questions before we?
Yeah, do you think the Korean style is developed around their physique? Do you think that?
No, their actual style. Coach Lee studied and watched the American shooters in the 70s and 80s, specifically Darryl Pace and Rick McKinney, and then applied that to the Korean national training system, and also went to a biomechanical school to learn biomechanics, and applied his knowledge there, and developed their base that literally nobody picks up a bow for years. You're not allowed to touch a bow for years. Maybe you'll get a stretch band in front of a mirror, and it's ingrained in them like it is. I talked earlier about a martial arts sport. It's truly a martial arts sport there. It's really disciplined. You don't get to a black belt without going through yellow, brown, blue, and whatever other colors there is, right? So they approach it that way, and that's why they all look basically the same, and are doing so well, because it's so structured and so regimented. And again, there's any faults, they throw them out and just get another one. Yeah.
I believe you said you shot in glasses at one point. Is
Yes.
there any? Obviously, some of us do wear glasses. Are there things that we should bear in mind, or things that could trip us up that we don't necessarily realize?
If you really want to get down to it, and you really want a great pair of glasses, you can. So every pair of glasses, and I only know this because I talked to an ophthalmologist, is if you have your lenses, they design the shape of the lens to have your eye centered in it like this, right? But when we're shooting, we're looking that way. So you could actually have your ophthalmologist build you specific lenses to have your eye looking over the bridge of your nose, and what that will do is it will really help change and clean up the distortion around the edges of your lenses, and that can really pay big dividends in the clarity of what you can see. So it's expensive because, you know, they got to put you in the measuring devices and then have you turn your head and look that way. And the one guy that I talked about had built a specific rig for that, or had one that was modular and he could move the thing around. It was over my pay grade to understand that. But if you can't do that, I would really pay attention to any coatings that are on the lenses,